Welcome to our deep dive today. And today we're going to be tackling this topic that everyone kind of knows about, but we want to go even deeper, and that's willpower. We're using Roy Baumeister and John Tierney's book, Willpower, Rediscovering the Greatest Human Strength. And so we're really going to try to get to the bottom of what willpower is, how it works, and why it matters so much in every area of our lives.
Yeah, it's interesting. Willpower for so long was sort of this old-fashioned idea, like something your grandparents would tell you about. But modern research is showing us that it's actually a real thing.
Yeah, it's almost like we talk about it all the time, but we don't actually know what it is. So,
Right.
so how did researchers really start to prove that willpower is more than just this concept?
Well, one of the most compelling pieces of evidence is something called the radish experiment. And in this study, what researchers did is they had people resist tempting treats.
Okay.
In this case, delicious cookies. And then they measured how well these people performed on subsequent tasks. And what they found was that those who had to resist the cookies, they actually performed worse.
That makes you think. So resisting a craving actually drains our mental energy.
Yeah.
Is that what is known as ego depletion?
That's exactly it. And this effect has been replicated in countless studies.
Wow.
So it really seems like willpower really is like a muscle in a way. It gets tired, it gets fatigued with use.
Okay, so willpower is a real force. But where does it come from?
The answer may surprise you. It's fueled by glucose.
Okay.
The simple sugar your body gets from food, it's actually the brain's primary fuel.
Hmm.
And when your glucose levels dip, well, so does your self-control.
That's interesting. There's a story about the comedian Jim Turner who's diabetic, and he had this really weird episode where he thought he could teleport.
Oh, wow.
And it turns out it was actually low glucose levels that were impacting his brain function. And luckily, his wife recognized what was happening, gave him some juice,
Yeah.
and that brought him back to reality.
That's a great example of, it sounds humorous, but it illustrates the impact that glucose has on our brains and our ability to think clearly.
Right.
And how low glucose can really have some pretty significant consequences.
Yeah.
Speaking of consequences, do you remember the Twinkie defense case?
Oh, right, where a
Yeah.
defense attorney tried to connect the murder that his client committed to junk food that he ate.
Yes. While the case was far more complex than just Twinkies,
Right.
it really sparked this public debate about the connection between diet and behavior, and particularly the impact of sugar on our ability to make good decisions.
So does this mean that we should all be just loading up on sugar to increase our willpower?
Not quite. Those quick sugar rushes, they're actually followed by crashes,
Right.
which can actually deplete your willpower even further. What we really need to focus on are slow-burning, low-glycemic foods. So things like vegetables, nuts, lean proteins. These provide a much more sustained source of energy for your brain and, as a result, for your willpower.
That makes a lot of sense. It's
Right.
almost like choosing a steady campfire instead of just quick bursts of fireworks, right? Yeah. So we know willpower is important and that it's fueled by glucose. But how do we use this information to actually manage willpower effectively in our everyday lives? Because we all have those never-ending to-do lists.
Right. It all starts with self-control. We need to set goals and regulate our behavior to achieve them. But, there's a catch. Juggling too many goals at once can actually backfire.
So you're saying that my huge list of New Year's resolutions was setting me up for failure.
Well, let's just say it makes things a lot more challenging. Research actually shows that having all these conflicting goals, it leads to worry, inaction, and even poor health outcomes. It's like trying to run in 10 different directions at once. You just end up going nowhere.
That makes sense. While I get that we shouldn't spread ourselves too thin, how do we deal with those tasks that just won't leave our minds? Those things we mean to do but don't ever quite get around to.
You're talking about the Zeigarnik effect.
Oh, okay.
This is the tendency for unfinished tasks to just linger in our thoughts. It's that nagging feeling of something left undone. Ah, yes. Like that email that I've been meaning to send, but I just keep putting it off. It's always in the back of my mind.
Exactly. The good news is that research shows that making concrete plans, it really helps. When we can break those tasks down into actionable steps, we can sort of close the loop and quiet those mental naggings.
This reminds me of David Allen's Getting Things Done method,
Yeah,
where he says, capture all your tasks and then break them down into these little chunks.
that's a great example of putting this principle into practice. And here's something else that might surprise you. Even making enjoyable decisions can be mentally taxing. It's not just about the task itself, but the mental energy required to make those choices.
So you're saying that, like, even choosing a movie for movie night can be mentally fatiguing.
Absolutely, it all adds up. And this brings us to another fascinating consequence of low willpower, what's called decision fatigue.
Decision fatigue. Tell me more, because I think we've all experienced that feeling of being mentally drained after making so many choices. Yes, and it can have a big impact on the quality of our decisions. For example, think about your shopping habits. Are you more impulsive after a long day of making decisions?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like if I'm mentally drained, everything starts to look good.
That's decision fatigue at work. When your willpower is depleted, you're more likely to avoid those difficult decisions, to cling to existing options even if they're bad ones, and just seek out the easiest
This
path.
is not just a matter of laziness or being undisciplined. It's really like our brains run low on fuel.
Exactly. And there's a really fascinating study that shows this. Researchers looked at parole judges, and they found that prisoners were more likely to be granted parole right after the judge's lunch break.
Wait, so a full stomach leads to more favorable decisions? That's kind of hilarious and also a little bit concerning at the same time.
It's fascinating because it shows how even these objective decisions can be influenced by our biological state. It highlights how interconnected our physical and mental well-being truly are.
Wow, that's a lot to consider. We've covered a lot of ground in understanding willpower, but it seems like there's so much more to explore. Maybe we should take a little break here. And then when we come back, we can dive deeper into some strategies for boosting our willpower.
That sounds like a great plan. We'll pick up right where we left off.
Welcome back to our deep dive on willpower. We've been talking about how willpower is like a muscle that can get tired, and it's fueled by glucose. Now, the big question is, how do we actually strengthen this willpower muscle?
That's the question, isn't it? It's not like there's a magical willpower potion or anything, but research has actually uncovered strategies that can make a real difference. And it starts with understanding that willpower is a finite resource.
So you're saying we can't expect to be operating at maximum willpower all the time?
Exactly. We need to be smart about how we use it. One way is to identify your peak willpower times, those periods when you naturally have more self-control.
Okay, so for some people, it might be like first thing in the morning before the day's demands start to pile up.
That's right. Schedule your most important or challenging tasks for those peak willpower times.
Got it. So for example, if I have a big project to tackle, it's better to do it first thing in the morning rather than like checking email or scrolling social media.
Yes, you want to use your prime mental real estate for the things that matter most. And just like with physical exercise, consistency is key. Small, regular acts of self-control can actually strengthen your willpower over time.
So it's not about making huge changes overnight, but building up our willpower gradually, kind of like training for a marathon.
That's a great analogy. It's about creating those positive feedback loops, where each successful act of self-control reinforces the next one.
So instead of trying to completely overhaul my diet, maybe I could start by resisting that afternoon cookie.
Exactly. Or commit to a short walk each day, even when you'd rather stay on the couch. These small victories, they really do add up over time.
That's encouraging, especially for those of us who maybe feel overwhelmed by the idea of big changes. But what about those temptations? How do we resist them when our willpower is running low?
One of the best strategies is to remove the temptations altogether. It's a lot easier to resist that bag of chips if it's not sitting right there in front of you.
Out of sight, out of mind. Simple but effective.
Right. So if you're trying to cut back on sweets, don't keep a candy jar on your desk. If online shopping is your weakness, maybe put your credit card away, or even ask a trusted friend to hold on to it for a while.
It's like setting ourselves up for success by minimizing those willpower challenges.
Right, because we're not always going to be operating at that peak willpower level. And if you can't completely get rid of a temptation, try to increase the friction between you and it. Make it less convenient to indulge.
So like if I'm trying to reduce my screen time, I could put my phone in a different room or disable those notifications.
Exactly. Or if you're trying to save money, you could unsubscribe from those tempting email lists or unfollow brands that are always having sales.
So we're basically building these little willpower obstacles to make it harder to give in to those impulses.
I like that. It's all about being proactive. Another powerful thing you can do is reframe your thinking about temptations. Instead of dwelling on what you're denying yourself, focus on the positive benefits of resisting.
So instead of saying, I can't have that cookie, I could say, I'm choosing to eat healthy foods that'll make me feel good.
Exactly. You shift your mindset from deprivation to empowerment. You're making a conscious choice that aligns with your goals. And here's a really interesting finding. Just believing that willpower is a limited resource can actually make it more limited.
So if I think my willpower is weak, it actually becomes weaker, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. But the good news is that the reverse is true as well. If you believe you have a strong reserve of willpower, you're more likely to keep going when things get tough.
So a positive mindset can actually boost our willpower. That's good to know.
Yeah, it's about cultivating this sense of self-efficacy, believing in your own ability to succeed. One way to do this is to focus on your past willpower victories. Remember those times when you successfully resisted temptation or stuck with a difficult task?
That's a good point. It's easy to focus on the times we messed up, but remembering those past successes can really give us a boost.
Right, and don't underestimate the importance of self-forgiveness. We all slip up sometimes. We give in to temptation, we lose our focus, we make impulsive decisions. The key is to not let those setbacks completely derail your efforts.
Beating ourselves up over it is probably just going to make our willpower weaker.
It can create this negative cycle. Instead, treat those slip-ups as learning opportunities. What can you learn from the experience? What strategies can you put in place to prevent it from happening again?
So it's like having a growth mindset. We're all works in progress, and even those so-called failures can help us get closer to our goals.
That's the idea. And don't underestimate the power of support. Surround yourself with people who encourage and support your efforts.
Yeah, having that support system can make a huge difference, especially when we're facing tough willpower challenges. We've covered how willpower works and some strategies for strengthening it, but what about those times when we just feel completely drained? Is there anything we can do to replenish our willpower reserves?
That's where good old-fashioned self-care comes in. We've talked about the importance of sleep and nutrition.
Right, those are essential for willpower to work properly.
Yes, and there are other things we can do to recharge those mental batteries. Mindfulness meditation has been shown to improve focus and self-control.
So just taking a few minutes each day to quiet the mind and be present can actually boost our willpower.
Exactly. It helps us become more aware of our thoughts and impulses, which allows us to make more conscious choices. And spending time in nature has also been shown to have restorative effects on our mental energy.
Even a short walk in the park can give our willpower a boost.
Absolutely. And don't forget about simply taking breaks. When we push ourselves too hard, our willpower suffers.
I definitely believe in taking vacations.
Vacations are fantastic for recharging, but even little breaks throughout the day can help stepping away from work, stretching, or just relaxing for a few minutes.
It's about finding that balance between pushing ourselves and giving ourselves a break.
Exactly. And don't forget the power of positive emotions. Laughter, joy, gratitude. These positive feelings can actually replenish our willpower reserves.
So watching a funny movie or hanging out with loved ones can boost our self-control. I like that idea.
It's about nourishing your mental and emotional well-being, which in turn supports your willpower.
This has been fascinating. We've explored the science of willpower, busted some myths, and uncovered practical strategies for harnessing this amazing human strength. But before we move on, I'm curious about the bigger picture here. What does this mean on a larger scale?
That's a great question. If we zoom out and look at the big picture, we see that willpower isn't just about individual success. It has huge implications for society as a whole.
You mean things like crime rates, health outcomes, even economic stability?
Exactly. When people have strong willpower, they're more likely to make healthy choices, be good citizens, and make responsible decisions that benefit everyone.
So investing in things that support willpower, like education, access to healthy food, and stress reduction programs, could actually have a ripple effect throughout society.
That's the idea. It's about creating environments that nurture and support self-control, which ultimately benefits everyone. Now, here's a question for our listeners to think about. We've been focusing on willpower from an individual perspective, but what if we viewed willpower as a collective resource?
Oh, that's interesting. What if we could somehow combine our willpower, support each other's efforts, and create a more willpower-resilient society?
What would that look like? What kind of initiatives or collaborations could we create to really tap into the power of collective willpower?
Those are definitely questions worth exploring. Maybe those are deep dives for another day. But for now, maybe we should shift gears and see how willpower plays out in specific areas of life, like finances, relationships, and health. You ready to dive into those?
Absolutely. Let's see how these willpower principles can be applied to create real and lasting change.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive on willpower. We've talked about the science behind it, how to strengthen it, and even how it plays out on a societal level. But now I want to get down to brass tacks. You know, how does this all actually work in our everyday lives? So let's start with something I think we all deal with, personal finances.
Oh, that's a great place to start. Overspending, debt, these are huge issues for a lot of people, and they often come down to, a lack of self-control when it comes to our money.
Right.
It's easy to get caught up in those instant gratification traps, all those buy now, pay later schemes.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've all been there. It's so easy to just click that button, especially when you're already tired after a long day.
Exactly. And that's how we end up with piles of credit card debt and a whole lot of regret.
Right, right.
So how can we use willpower to break free from these kinds of negative financial habits?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? What are some practical things we can do?
One of the most effective things is to create a budget and stick to it. It might sound simple, but, it takes willpower to track your spending, to resist those impulse buys, and to prioritize those long-term goals over those immediate rewards.
Right. It's like making that commitment up front, like deciding how you're going to use your money and then actually having the discipline to follow through.
Yeah, it's about moving from that kind of reactive, emotional spending to a more proactive, intentional approach.
That makes a lot of sense. What about saving, though? Saving can be really hard, especially when there's so many things you could be spending your money on right now.
Absolutely. Saving requires delaying gratification. We have to choose our future selves over our present desires, and that takes willpower. But there are things we can do to make it feel less like a sacrifice and more like a step towards a better future.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
What are some of the things we can do to kind of boost our willpower when it comes to saving?
One really helpful thing is to automate your savings. Set up those automatic transfers from your checking to your savings. That way the money's just gone. You don't even have to think about it.
Yeah, it's like paying yourself first and taking the decision out of it every single month.
Exactly. Another helpful strategy is to visualize those savings goals. Create a vision board. Find some images that represent your dreams, whether it's a vacation or a down payment on a house or early retirement, whatever it is for you.
So use that motivation to help us save more.
Yeah, having that visual reminder of what you're working towards can be super powerful. And don't forget to celebrate those milestones along the way. Acknowledge your progress, those little wins. It helps reinforce those positive habits.
That's a great point. It's about creating that positive feedback loop. The more we celebrate those wins, the more we want to keep going.
And don't forget about financial literacy. The more we understand about money, the better we are at making good financial decisions. Knowledge is power.
Right, so it's not just about willpower, but also having the knowledge to make smart choices. Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about relationships. I think we all know that strong, healthy relationships take effort, compromise, and yeah, a good amount of willpower.
Oh, that's so true. It's easy to be loving and supportive when things are good, but when conflict comes up or your partner does something annoying or you're just feeling depleted, those are the times when willpower is really important.
Yeah, I think we've all been in those tough relationship moments. So how does willpower actually help us in those situations?
It's about consciously choosing to respond in a way that's good for the relationship, even when it's hard.
Hmm.
It's about choosing kindness over criticism, patience over getting upset, and understanding over judgment.
So like instead of snapping back at your partner when they're stressed, maybe take a deep breath and give them a hug.
Yeah, exactly. Or instead of getting defensive when they give you feedback, maybe try to listen and see things from their side.
It's about remembering what's really important, connection and intimacy and respect, and putting those above our own impulses in the moment.
Right, and that takes willpower. Another important part of relationships is setting boundaries. Knowing your limits and communicating them clearly and with respect.
Oh yeah, boundaries are huge in any healthy relationship, but they can be hard to set and maintain, especially when we're feeling pressured or we're trying to avoid conflict.
It takes willpower to stick to those boundaries, even when you're tempted to give in.
Like, for example, if we've agreed to have a tech-free night together, it takes willpower to not check your phone, even if you hear a notification.
That's a perfect example. And boundaries aren't about control, they're about creating a healthy, respectful dynamic in the relationship.
Right. It seems like willpower really touches so many parts of building and keeping healthy relationships. Now, for our last area, let's talk about health.
Yeah, health. Everything from maintaining a healthy weight, exercising regularly, to managing stress, it all comes down to willpower.
Right. We know what we should be doing, but actually doing it, that's the hard part.
Exactly. And that's where willpower is essential. It takes willpower to resist those unhealthy cravings, to get up and move even when you don't feel like it, and to prioritize stress-reducing activities over things that just make us more stressed.
Yeah, it can feel like a constant uphill battle. So how do we use willpower to create those healthy habits that actually last?
Start small and build up gradually. Instead of completely changing your diet overnight, maybe you start by just adding more fruits and vegetables to your meals.
Okay, so don't try to do everything at once.
Yeah, little changes are easier to stick with in the long run. And when it comes to exercise, find something you enjoy. If you hate running, don't force yourself to run. There are tons of other ways to move: dancing, swimming, hiking, yoga. Find what works for you.
Right, find what you'll actually do.
And make exercise a non-negotiable part of your day. Schedule it in like an important meeting.
So it doesn't get pushed aside. Now, what about stress? I feel like stress is just a fact of life these days. How can willpower help us manage it better?
Stress is unavoidable, but we can choose how we respond to it. And that's where willpower comes in. Make time for things that reduce stress, like meditation, spending time outdoors, listening to calming music, instead of things that make us more stressed.
So it's about being proactive, not just reacting when we're already overwhelmed.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to say no. We often feel like we have to say yes to every request, every invitation, everything people ask of us. But that can lead to burnout and drain our willpower.
Yeah, it's like we don't want to disappoint anyone or miss out. But sometimes saying no is the best thing for us.
It is. Saying no to things that drain us frees us up to say yes to things that actually give us energy.
Right. It's about setting those boundaries, taking care of ourselves, and using willpower to protect our energy so we can show up for the things that really matter.
That's a great way to put it. It's been so interesting exploring willpower, the power it has, the challenges, and how much it can change our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. We've covered a lot today. Hopefully everyone listening feels like they can use these strategies in their own lives. It's been a really great deep dive into something that affects all of us.
And remember, willpower is a muscle. It gets stronger with practice. Every time you use self-control, you're getting closer to living a more fulfilling life.
So keep flexing those willpower muscles, everyone. Until next time.